Hi, my name's Richie, and before we start our walk, well, I call it a walk, but it's more than just a walk. Hampstead has historically had a high concentration of the rich and famous, so this is really a 2 mile tour of places associated with some of the area's well-known residents, past and present. Oh, and it includes a couple of pubs. If you're visiting London for a few days holiday and you're looking for some respite from the intensity of the city's tourist hotspots, but you still want to learn something about London's rich history, and I'd suggest this walk could be ideal for you. Hampstead Underground Station is only a 10-minute journey on the Northern Line from Euston Station, and so it feels a good place to start and finish our walk. It's the deepest station on the Underground system at 192 feet, and you can reach street level via a spiral staircase with over 320 steps, or use the large lift, which I'd recommend. Note the tiles with the name Heath Street. This is the name originally proposed for the station. I've worked on the theory that you've arrived by tube. Now, if you're from outside the UK, you might not be familiar with the term the tube. Well, it's what Londoners call the underground system. It's Hampstead Underground you want, not Hampstead Overground or West Hampstead. Of course you can get here by other means, bus, taxi, car, but this will be your starting point in the heart of Hampstead Village. As you step out the station, you're going to turn right up Heath Street. As you walk up Heath Street, look out for number 98. This was the home of Peter O'Toole for over 50 years. He bought it after starring in Lawrence of Arabia in 1962, and his New Year's Eve parties at the house were notorious. This is a fairly busy road and you will need to cross it, but there is a zebra crossing. After a short walk, you'll come across the gaff on the left-hand side of the road. You've walked past a number of nice shops and restaurants, such as you'd expect in Hampstead, but we're going to pause at Le Gaff. It's the oldest business on Heath Street and still owned by the same family who opened it over 60 years ago. The restaurant was run by husband and wife Bernardo and Andrula. Unfortunately, since COVID, the restaurant has shut. Nowadays, it's a B&B run by their son Lorenzo. The dining room, thankfully, is still as it has been for many decades. Lorenzo has pledged to keep it that way as long as he is the owner. It's used for breakfast now if you stay overnight. The murals and plaster mouldings were created by an Italian artist and it has a feel of a real old Italian restaurant. The dining room, over its lifetime, has seen many famous figures from the 20th century. I find it fascinating. I'll quickly run through some of them. The Queen Mother, Princess Margaret, the Beatles, Cliff Richard, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, Oliver Reed, Peter Sellers, Clint Eastwood, Charlie Chaplin, Dame Judi Dench, Ricky Gervais, and Muhammad Ali. I mentioned Peter O'Toole earlier. Well, his wake was here too. When you've finished digesting the scale of truly iconic people who've walked through that front door, from the British royal family to Hollywood royalty, you'll turn up the side of Le Gaff onto the Mount. I'm going to give you a what 3 words location, just for your reassurance. You won't need it. It's only a 2-minute walk, but it is a slight meander. Effectively go straight ahead onto Admiral's Walk. The what 3 words are Admiral, complains, hidden. On your right you'll see an imposing house which is a local landmark. It may seem familiar to you. It might be because you've been to the Tate Britain and seen one of Constable's paintings of the house. Or maybe you've seen Walt Disney's 1964 classic Mary Poppins. The house with a quarterdeck on the roof and portholes bears a striking resemblance to Captain Boom's house, from where he used to fire a cannon twice a day. The author P.L. Travers did live in Hampstead for a spell. She never confirmed it's her inspiration. I'll let you draw your own conclusion. A quirk of the property is the name, as there is no record in its 300-year history of an admiral ever living here. However, Sir George Gilbert Scott did live here. Now, I'm not really a blue plaque man. They can be a bit highbrow for me. We've already passed one I chose not to mention, but some I feel we should touch on. If you're sightseeing in London, and there's every chance you are, then it's inevitable you have seen something designed by one of the dynasty of 3 generations of Gilbert Scotts. Maybe the Albert Memorial in Hyde Park, the Midland Hotel that fronts St Pancras Station, Battersea Power Station, which dominates the skyline in West London, has been repurposed and regenerated in recent years. You will undoubtedly have seen a classic red phone box, which was designed by Sir George's grandson Giles. Sir George was so highly regarded that he is buried in Westminster Abbey. Next door is Grove Lodge, where John Goldsworthy lived. He was the author of the Forsyte Saga. The house sold for over £10 million recently. I mentioned that Admiral's house featured a number of John Constable's paintings. Well, that can probably be explained by the fact he could see the house from his window. If you carry on up Admiral's Walk, within a minute or two you'll come to Lower Terrace. Pretty much opposite you, you will see a blue plaque on number 2. Did I mention I don't do blue plaques? Constable is now one of our most famous and celebrated artists, but during his lifetime he only sold about 40 paintings. Art wasn't a particularly lucrative career for him. Fortunately for him, his father was a successful mill owner in Suffolk. 2 Lower Terrace is now worth over £3.5 million. Although he lived in Hampstead for much of his life, he only lived here for 2 years. But it was during this period that he painted probably his most famous work, The Haywain, which seemed to hang on every dining room wall in the 1970s. Our next stop is 3 minutes away along Windmill Hill to where it meets Frognall Rise. The what 3 words reference are Trip, Lion, Crunch. Up to now I've mentioned property prices twice, and I promise not to do it again. I'm sure you've established by now that unless you have millions in your bank account, it's probably not worth looking in estate agents. It is a stunning area with amazing properties wherever you look. It's no surprise that it has been and still is such a draw for those who can afford it. Which brings us to our next property. Across the road you see a large building, well 2 buildings really. They dominate this area in this prime spot high in Hampstead. It was opened in 1881 as Mount Vernon Hospital, but is now luxury apartments, and to the best of my knowledge, still the home of Emma Bonton the Spice Girl. As we continue on past the old hospital, we very quickly come to Holly Mount on your left hand side. Don't miss it, it's quite narrow. I promised you a couple of pubs and here's the first. Now, whether you're ready for a pint, a bite to eat, or just want to see another place where its list of patrons is super impressive, then the Holly Bush ticks all the boxes. On a personal note, I would like to say that London is full of wonderful historic pubs, but this is one of my favourites. It is on the tourist trail, not least of all because of the Ariana Grande effect, but it does feel quite authentic and particularly in the evening, very much a locals pub. There are different rooms where you can get some privacy, but generally I don't think people take a lot of notice. They're used to famous visitors. So I'm going to stick my neck out here and say, if you're a visitor from overseas and you wish to visit just one quintessential English pub, then I would recommend the Holly Bush. Obviously, other quintessential English pubs are available. Okay, so this is a bit where I rattle off some names who are said to have been spotted in the pub. Jude Law, Emma Bunton, Sam Smith, Ricky Gervais, Emma Thompson, Pierce Brosnan, Harry Styles, Peter Cook, Peter O'Toole. Taylor Swift went on a date here. Jamie Oliver has said he wants to have his ashes scattered in a bar. Liam Gallagher has been thrown out. Although to be fair, I think Liam has been thrown out of most pubs in Hampstead. These are the names that I can find associated with the pub. But let's face it, you can probably say that virtually every resident in Hampstead would have been in the Holly Bush at some time. As you leave the pub, the house opposite with a flight of stairs up to the front door was once owned by Jamie Oliver. As you leave the pub, you're going to walk back up Holly Mount. Bear left and then right on a slight dogleg on Mount Vernon. On the left hand side is a row of houses. These houses may all have conker eaves hanging on their doors, which seems a very specific and unique thing to this row of houses. At the far end of the row is number 7 and another blue plaque. I think this one is a little tenuous. Robert Louis Stevenson never owned a house, he boarded there for 2 summers. However, he was one of our literary giants and worthy of a mention. Robert was 3rd generation of another successful family dynasty. The Stevensons were responsible for building over half of Scotland's lighthouses. He was expected to go into the family business, but it wasn't what he wanted. Robert suffered from ill health all his life. His visits to Hampstead were to help his health, away from the smog of industrial London. At this stage, his writing career hadn't taken off. Treasure Island was nearly 10 years off. He died at the age of 44. Now our next stop is only a 2-minute walk away down the pathway. I'm going to say this is an optional detour because we will be returning to this spot. We're going to take a look at St Dorothy's Convent at 99 Frognall. And if you're not sure, that is a name of a road. I know, it is a bit unusual. When you get onto the road, at the end, slightly to your left, on the other side, is the house where Charles de Gaulle lived. The what three words are fairly, firms, moves. If it sounds a bit dry to you, I will try and bring a bit of context for you. He lived here from 1942 to 44 while he was in exile. London was still being bombed, and it's said that he would watch at night from the rooftop terrace. He was leader of the Free French Forces and would broadcast on the BBC with morale-boosting speeches. He left Frognal to return to France 5 days before Paris was liberated, and he made a famous speech which solidified his leadership of liberated France. He was a man who divided opinion. Churchill didn't like him, and neither did Roosevelt. His liberation speech didn't help that relationship when he failed to give any significant credit to the Allies' contribution to the liberation of Paris. It would have been quite nice if he'd also mentioned the nice accommodation the Brits had provided for him. While we're here, it gives us an opportunity to get a different view of the old hospital, now known as Gainsborough House. We're now going to return back up the path to Robert Louis Stevenson's blue plaque. When you reach the end of the path, turn right onto Holly Walk. This is Dame Judi Dench territory. She married fellow Shakespearean actor Michael Williams at St Mary's Church in 1971. The couple spent much of their 30 years married life living just yards away in Prospect Place. Now, in truth, it's only a narrow passageway, and I would say for the sake of the current residents, you don't go down there. As soon as you pass Prospect Place, you will come to St John's Graveyard. Dame Judy's house overlooked here. We'll come back to this graveyard later. It's a 3 to 4 minute walk to our next port of call. And as you walk down Holly Walk, on the right hand side you will go past the back garden of our next house. When you get to the end, turn right and right again into Frognal Gardens. OK, so it's another blue plaque. This one is outside number 8 Frognal Gardens. It's not that I don't like them, it's just that I don't know who most of the people are. Commemorative plaques are quite common in cities around the world now, but London was the first. It now has over 1,000. But I can assure you there are plenty en route that I have ignored. Alistair Sims's was unveiled in 2008. One of English Heritage's rules is that the recipient must have been dead for at least 20 years. His daughter unveiled it, and present were Sir Ian McKellen, Barbara Windsor, and from what I understand, George Cole, who was a long-time friend and colleague. They worked on many films together. Alistair and his wife bought the house in 1953 when he was probably at the peak of his 50-year acting career. Scrooge had just been released, in which he played the title role, and many consider his interpretation as a benchmark for others to follow. In 1954, the first St Trinian's film was released, and An Inspector Calls, in which he played the lead role. Alistair died in 1976. We're now going to return back down Frognal Gardens and turn right at the bottom. Our next stop is about a 5-minute walk away. It's not the most direct route because I want to take you past a mystery house. I'm not going to give you the address because Ricky Gervais still lives there, or at least he did when I made this film. See if you can spot it. When you get to the end of the road, turn left onto Frognal. Now there's that name again. There's Frognal, Frognal Gardens, Frognal Close, Frognal Lane and Frognal Way. The name has been associated with the area for 600 years. It doesn't mean any more than a frog's habitat. Shortly you're going to come across Frognal Way on your left. It's a private gated road, but don't worry, you can walk up it. It's not very long, but it is very exclusive. Not that many years ago it was named as the UK's 7th most expensive street. You'll come to an Art Deco house on a bend, which doesn't have a front garden wall, which is unusual round here. Gracie Fields had this built for her between the years 1931 to 34, but it's doubtful she ever lived here. By this time she'd split with her husband and he lived here with his new partner. So again, it's a tenuous link, but it's worth a walk just to see a road that you may not naturally walk down. And if we continue on Frognal Way, it brings us neatly to our next What Three Words location, which if you're interested in famous figures, and I'm presuming you are because you're still with me, is a must, and I think possibly unique in London. The What Three Words are Shakes, Closes, Pillow. You literally just continue along Frognal Way. When you get to the end, to the left you'll see the gateway to St John's Church and graveyard. What makes this spot so special? Well, apart from the fact it's a wonderful spot, if you take away the cars and the scaffold, you feel it hasn't radically changed in 200 years. Even the 19th century street lamps and the bollards you just walked through at the end of Frognall Way are listed. You're only a 5-minute walk to most of the places you have or will visit, only 10 minutes away from the furthest. It's the sheer volume of people who have helped shape the country we know today, who have almost certainly at some stage been on this spot, that make it special. I'm not talking about royalty or politicians, although there have been a few of them too. I'm talking about ordinary people who through their careers have become household names and have passed this way in the course of their private lives. What I'm going to do now is slowly turn around 180 degrees and hopefully show you what I mean. We're looking down Church Row with its elegant 18th century houses, many of them Grade 2 listed, and it wouldn't be too controversial to call it Hampstead's best street. On the right hand side at number 17, H.G. Wells lived and wrote a number of his books. In more recent times, Peter Cook lived here at the height of his fame. We'll take a closer look later. As we move round, just past the last house is Frognall Way, with Gracie Field's house only yards away. Beyond the railings at the far end of the ancient graveyard, where according to Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula visited one full moon, is the tomb of John Constable and his wife. He was married to Maria for 12 years, in which time she had 7 children. She suffered with tuberculosis and died at the age of 42. The church itself is a lovely church and is open to the public at certain times. In a minute or two, we'll take a look at some of the people who have been laid to rest in the church's second graveyard. Their services will have probably been held in this church, and you can start to imagine some of the mourners who walked through the gates and down the pathway. For example, Peter Cook's memorial service was held here. There's a grand piano installed for the day and Dudley Moore sang Goodbye. John Cleese did a eulogy in which he stated Peter Cook was the funniest man he ever met, which I'm guessing was a bit of a slap in the face for his fellow Pythons. Sports icons Henry Cooper and Bobby Charlton attended, and as you'd expect, an impressive list of British comedy greats. I think it's time I took a deep breath and gave you another list. Dave Allen, Harry Enfield, Spike Milligan, John Cleese, Michael Palin, Barry Took, David Frost, Barry Humphries, Clive Anderson, Hugh Laurie, Mel Smith, Griff Rhys-Jones and David Baddiel all walked through these gates. The road next to the church leads to Ricky Gervais' house. The houses between the trees are the backs of the houses where Alistair Sim lived, and beyond the trees in the graveyard is the previous home of Michael Williams and Dame Judi Dench. The graveyard at St John's isn't particularly on the tourist trail like Golders Green or Highgate, but for me I prefer it to Highgate Cemetery, partly because it's aesthetic setting, and partly because it's easy accessibility, and partly because the graves of prime interest to me are close together. So let's take a closer look. They're all in the foreground, just the other side of the railing. There's a gate at the corner. Kay Kendall. If you're struggling to remember where you know the name from, then I'll remind you. It's probably Genevieve, the classic British film about a car. She was a successful actress and singer, but she died at the age of 32. The story of her ill health and death is intriguing and sad. I recommend you look it up. The clue is on the headstone, a marital name of Harrison, and at the bottom the word Rex. To the left-hand side there are 2 discrete memorial stones, side by side. On the right is Peter Cook's and the left is his wife Lynn. You'll see a couple of prominent graves close by. One is politician Hugh Gateskill, who was leader of the Labour Party from 1955 until his death in 1963. You'll also see the de Maurier family grave. The de Maurier's presence is hard to avoid in Hampstead. Another successful family dynasty of 3 generations. George's granddaughter was Daphne, a successful author, most famous for Rebecca and Jamaica Inn. Close to the de Maurier grave is George's daughter's family grave, the Llewellyn Davises. I suppose when you're looking around graveyards, tragic is a word which comes naturally, but the Davis family, as they were generally known, I think could be called tragic. Again, you might want to explore their story a little bit more, but I'm not going to go into any depth here. What I will say is Sylvie and Arthur had 5 sons, and they were the inspiration for the Lost Boys in J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. Sadly, the headstone isn't big enough to fit in the names of all those who are buried here, but if you look on the ground you will see another stone with the name Peter. His ashes are interred here. On the right of the Llewellyn Davis grave is Anton Bulbuck's. He was an actor who was born in Austria, died in Germany, but wanted his ashes interred in Hampstead. He made many films, but the one that is probably most topical is Gaslight, in which he played the lead male role and which modern day term gaslighting is based. To the left of the Llewellyn Davis grave is one that you could easily miss. It is the last resting place of Jackie and Joan Collins' mum. Before we leave, can I just point out the relatively new stone behind these, which is Nicholas Parsons, who I'm sure you need no introduction to. He enjoyed a long and varied career on radio and television, including presenting Just a Minute and Sale of a Century. We'll leave the graveyard the same way we entered and then turn left on Church Row. That's how 180 degrees finished. I wonder if you feel the same history and significance as I do. On the right, the third house along is number 17. H.G. Wells lived here. Most people will have heard of H.G. Wells, but how many people know what the H.G. stands for? Well, it's Herbert George. He wrote more than 50 novels in his lifetime, but he's best known for his science fiction. He already had War of the Worlds and The Invisible Man under his belt and was a wealthy man. He didn't really settle here though. The family had lived in a large country house previously, and it's said that he found the noise from the regular horse-drawn funeral corteges clattering along the cobbles as distracting. Now, for baby boomers like myself, another resident number 17 may pique your interest a little more. Peter Cook moved here in 1965 with his wife Wendy. The name, of course, was popularised by J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. The family moved out in 1971. This period coincides almost exactly with his television series with Dudley Moore, Not Only but Also. Wendy is described hearing the laughter coming from the attic room where Dud and Pete would write their scripts. You can picture the pair of them maybe rehearsing the one-legged Tarzan sketch up there. The couple enjoyed entertaining. Wendy was a fine cook who went on to write cookbooks, and they would host dinner parties in the basement. The names mentioned regarding these parties are many of the people who attended his memorial service, and there's every chance many of them will have benefited from their hospitality. But Paul McCartney and John Lennon are 2 names who haven't cropped up yet. Paul's been for dinner, and so has John and Cynthia. John and Peter seem to have a similar sense of humour. John appeared in a sketch for the pilot of the first series of Not Only. This was in 1965 at the height of Beatlemania and must have been quite a coup for Don and Pete. Peter moved out when his marriage ended and the house was sold in 1971. From here you can see his memorial stone. We're going to continue on Church Row and then turn right and then right again onto Perrins Walk. A street that you'd probably walk past, but down this inconspicuous mews Peter Cook lived for the last 20 years of his life. By all accounts it's a mews with coach houses for Church Row, but they certainly don't look like the average coach houses. Peter's was number 24. He lived here with his second wife, actress Judy Huxtable. They divorced in 1989 after a long separation, and he married his third wife Lynn the same year. Peter's parties were lively affairs, packed with famous people. By this time he seems to have moved on from the Beatles and was now socialising with the Stones. Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood were visitors to the cobbled street, as were some of the Pythons and Stephen Fry. When we leave Perrins Walk, we find ourselves back in the heart of Hampstead Village on Heath Street. This area has lots of independent shops, bars and cafes, and feel free to explore. We're on our way to the second pub, The Flask, on Flask Walk. The what 3 words are late, lend, firms. I'm going via Oriel Place, but Perrins Court's definitely worth a visit. If you turn left onto Heath Street, you can cross the road opposite the Horseshoe pub. Oriel Place runs up the side. I just want to pause by this London plane tree. It's a local landmark and a lovely tranquil spot. We're pretty much at the end of our walk, so I think it's a good time to summarise and tell you a little bit about myself. As I said at the beginning, it's approximately a 2-mile walk, although the nature of the area means it is a bit up and down with some steps to deal with. Within that 2 miles, it is very compact with points of interest every few minutes. I've concentrated on these points of interest, but the streets and alleyways are very picturesque and quiet. We can't see inside the houses, but we can walk the same streets. You may have noticed I don't use the word celebrity. It's a word that I feel nowadays is associated with people who are famous for being famous, if you know what I mean. But to be fair, the people we've mentioned today are genuine celebrities. Now, I'm guessing by now you've worked out I'm not an experienced YouTuber. This is my first attempt. I'm hoping that what I lack in presentation skills I make up for in content. All comments are welcome, as long as they're nice ones. I'm a sensitive soul. From my point of view, if I've left you with more questions and answers, then I will be happy, because it means you've been interested in what I've had to say. I've only touched on the stories, they can all be expanded on. There's a story behind every door. If I get enough positive feedback, I will post another walk and show you a bit more of London's history. Now, before we leave, we're looking at the back of the Horseshoe pub. For the beer lovers among you, it has its own place in Hampstead's history. It's a gastropub now, but in the cellars below it's where Camden Town Brewery evolved. It's here that the landlord started brewing. In 2010 he established a brewery in nearby Camden and started producing Hell's Lager. Above the pub, Pentameter's Fringe Theatre was housed for over 50 years. Ben Elton, Rick Mail and French and Saunders have all appeared here. We continue on Oriel Place and turn left and then right onto Flask Walk. Flask Walk is a bustling, pedestrianised thoroughfare packed with shops and cafes. Shortly you'll come across the Flask, not to be confused with the Flask in Highgate. Iconic, a bit like celebrity, I think is a much overused word, but I feel pretty safe in saying this is an iconic London pub. If you can picture a Flask Walk with snow on the ground, then you might recognise the pub from the latest Bridget Jones film, Mad About the Boy, in which it featured significantly in the Christmas scenes. The building is over 150 years old and still has many original features and hasn't radically changed. The food's a little pretentious, as you'd expect in Hampstead, but you can get fish and chips and a roast on Sundays. So as you're sat having a bite to eat or some light refreshment, let your imagination run wild with some of the situations these walls may have witnessed. Dodd and Pete with their raincoats and flat caps, putting the world to rights. Emma Bunton and Liam Gallagher singing Don't Look Back in Anger on karaoke. Or even Peter O'Toole and Dame Judy sat at the bar playing drinking games. Sid Vicious and Johnny Rotten lived in a squat around the corner, up until the Sex Pistols and punk rock shook the world. I could just see the pair of them sat in the corner with their shandies, working out where to stick the safety pins. Or maybe you could just try and guess how many famous names I've mentioned. I'm going to leave you now to enjoy your drink. Hampstead Tube Station is only 2 minutes away. Back along Flask Walk and turn right. Hopefully I'll speak to you again soon.